The Hockey Hall of Fame announced its class of 2020 this week. Some names that were expected in Jarome Iginla and Marian Hossa. Some names that have been sitting around for a while, Doug Wilson and Kevin Lowe. But who is still not in the Hall of Fame that should be? Let's dive down that rabbit hole. There are still arguably some people who should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame who aren't, or at least people who other people will make an argument for that they should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame that aren't. Bubba O'Neill, give us one of your guys or girls that should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame right now, but that has been snubbed.
Well, I think there's been a certain amount of snubs for what I would call international players. And I know I felt over the years that there's been a bit of a Canadian bias. And I mean, you can start off with that Daniel Alfredsson, the fine captain of the Ottawa Senators for many years, and the leader of that one line with Spezza and Heatley. I mean, rode them all the way to a Stanley Cup. But I hate a Stanley Cup final. But thank you. I know you're an anti-Sens fella, but I stand to be corrected. You know what, guys? I have to hijack you guys. I really do. Like, I know we're talking about snubs here today, and maybe I really trying to stay on the line, on the rails. But, I mean, the snub to me is, why is the Hockey Hall of Fame such a secret? Why? Why is everything a secret? Why are we even talking about snubs? Because if we had a level of accountability in the voting for this thing, instead of 18 white guys in a room talking about this and debating this, why isn't it like baseball, where we actually can track a guy and figure out, did they get 60% of the vote? Did they get 80% of the vote? If they only got 20, we could just wipe the slate clean and say this guy's never getting in. Why is it like this, guys?
I agree with that, and I don't want to see it like baseball. And I was a Baseball Hall of Fame voter for 23 years. Because it's headed for a disastrous place because of statistics and that, and who could vote and the steroid guys and all of those kinds of things. But I think at least the accountability, Bubba, should be what was the vote at 14 of 18? At the very least, all we know is that they got at least 14. If did somebody get 6? Like, what's the deal there? Did Jennifer Bockrell get 6? Like, what's the story? I agree with you. There's got to be a little more transparency here, especially for something that's so loved and such a big deal.
But, Steve, you even left it. You said at least. I think we go even before that. We don't even know who they're voting on. We don't even know whose name is being brought up at this point. The Daniel Alfredsson that Bubba mentions, look, he's a great player. He was a great player. He should probably be a Hall of Famer. But we don't even know if his name was brought forward, and because we don't know that, his name may never have been mentioned in that meeting.
That'll give him peace of mind too. I mean, did Alfredsson or anybody else who was considered and not get in this year, did they get any votes? Steve mentioned Jennifer Botterbull, who's amongst the top of my list. An international superstar for Canada, someone who is definitely deserving of a Hall of Fame induction. Did she get any votes? Did she get 1, none, 3? I mean, the accountability and the clarity around this whole issue of this 18-member committee has to be improved drastically.
But they don't want to, and there's no purpose because, I mean, why would they?
Because no one challenges it, right? No one has challenged it. It's just accepted. It's the way it is. I know that I did see, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Lanny McDonald was questioned on it in a press conference, and he kind of dusted it off and really didn't give an answer, right? So to me, this turns into some private club between, I said, like a bunch of guys sitting in a room. And I know that we question this with the end of the year awards with the Canadian Team of the Year, right? And I'm sure it would be great to be in that room because you have some great minds and some great opinions that are going back and forth. But again, I need accountability. I know that, Scott, you may be one of the people. I think we discussed this on your radio show on 900 CHML. That where on earth did Kevin Lowe and Doug Wilson come from? I think if you combine the years, you're looking at I think it was 45 years of eligibility that all of a sudden these guys have come out of nowhere and have become Hall of Famers. At least if we had a voting, we could, as I said, we could track these guys and see, they're getting close. You know, in baseball, oh, Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens are getting close. Or, you know what, we watched Larry Walker for 10 years basically go, and then knew in his final year that he had a real good shot of getting in. So the lack of transparency to me, almost for me, and this is a personal thing, dismisses this Hall of Fame.
Steve was in elementary school when Doug Wilson became eligible.
That's right.
And he's been sitting there, and then all of a sudden he pops up.
Well, look, don't forget what kind of year this is. This was a year for they should have put another person in this year too, because this was a year to fill holes.
Yeah,
you know, we see that a lot, and it happens in football too, in the American Football Hall of Fame as well. I mean, you fill some holes in years in which there aren't a lot of great people eligible, and there weren't a lot this year. Going back to Bubba's point about international players, I think McGillney is just. I mean, I only see one player right now that really should be in there. At least male player. I mean, I see 2 or 3 female players that should be in there immediately, but one male player right now, and that's McGillney. Like, to me, he's ahead of Alfredson. I mean, for 1,000 reasons.
Well, the Hockey Hall of Fame, one of the criteria that they use is supposed to be your impact beyond just the game itself.
Right. And that was impact.
So if it's a question of McGillney and Alfredson as players, you can make a case that they're rather similar, but McGillney's impact as far as Russian players getting into the NHL blows Alfredson's story out of the water. Doesn't mean Alfredson doesn't earn a spot there.
No.
But to Steve's point, who comes first? I would say I'm agreeing. I think McGillney would be first.
Yeah, without a guy like McGillney, perhaps there isn't an Alfredson, perhaps there isn't an Igor Larionov, a Slava Fedosov, a Sergei Makarov. All these guys came before McGillney, who basically risked his life to defect from the former Soviet Union to play the game that he loved, and was better than a point-a-game guy in the National Hockey League. He won, some individual awards like the Lady Byng. He is a Stanley Cup winner. He's a guy that has international success, Olympics, World Juniors, World Hockey Championship. He's done it all. I mean, I'm not sure what this committee wanted more from Alex McGillney. Paul Kariya's in the Hall of Fame. Paul Kariya doesn't have a Stanley Cup. Alex McGillney does, and he's not in the Hall. It's criminal.
I think you guys might remember, because we're kind of real close to the border, that when he did defect, I mean, that was not just a sports story. You were seeing that on the Buffalo news stations of this great hockey, up-and-coming young Russian hockey player that was defecting and going to play for the Buffalo Sabres. And then he responded by scoring on his first shift as a Sabre. It was an incredible story.
76 goals one year?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and again, this is one of those questions that I look at, and I believe that Doug Wilson is a Hockey Hall of Famer. What I don't get is how McGillney is still sitting outside while you've put other people in, and how Doug Wilson had to wait. 95, I think, was his first year of eligibility. 96, maybe something in there. First of all, he's done nothing to enhance his resume as a player. As a builder, yes, but as a player, no. But why would he wait this long? There are other guys that I would look at and say Doug Wilson should have been in, as you're talking about filling, Steve, before. And is it because in a private, non-disclosed discussion, friends of Doug now get more sway because you got new voters, or is it?
Well, if you take an ugly tack to it, you could say that you look at both Doug Wilson and Kevin. They're both executives, right? Mm-hmm. Both NHL executives, right? So there's some of that there too. But that's one of the good things about the discussion process. Where people can talk about things. It's a good thing about the Lou Marsh, as I think Bubba was mentioning earlier. That people make discussions, and over time, you can change the perspective with which somebody looks at something. I've had that same thing happen to me where I've voted for somebody. Bingo. Mm-hmm. Bingo. That's one of the best cases of people discussing and pointing out and showing types of things. And I'm not sure I voted for Larry the first year, but I did every year thereafter because I was listening to some arguments. But those arguments weren't public. So, if I hadn't paid attention, I might not have heard those arguments. But in a committee room, you do hear those things. I'd like to make a suggestion on Builder here. And I didn't want to catch the other guys by surprise, but there's a guy named Howard Baldwin that should be in the Hall of Fame. He was, and here's why. He was a founder of the WHA. He was the president of the WHA when they merged with the NHL. He was the only guy that was at the first meeting of the WHA and was there when they merged with the NHL. He was the guy that made it happen from the WHA side. Invented the Hartford Whalers. Their sweater is still, I think, in the top 10 hockey sweaters, jerseys, logos sold, and the team hasn't existed forever. Ended up owning the Pittsburgh Penguins. So he won a Stanley Cup and an Avco Cup. Ended up, he's the guy who started, nobody knows this one. He's the guy who started the San Jose Sharks, had the whole deal set up, all ready to go, recognized the market, had set up the whole deal for an arena, all that type of thing. And then the NHL stepped in and said, no, we owe the Guns because they're going basically chest up in Minnesota. So they made a flip there. So he got San Jose started too. And how successful is that franchise? Unbelievable. He was one of the guys that reinvented the way tickets were done in the NHL, working for Eddie Snyder at Philadelphia. And he was the guy who nominated Ed Snyder for the Hall of Fame. So now, disclosure here, he's a friend. But really, as a builder, who's done more?
But
WHA made American hockey players. There were no American pro hockey players till the WHA came along. And then we know what they did for European players with the Jets. But the underwritten story there is the WHA created all those jobs for American hockey players.
But Steve, as it stands right now, maybe his name was brought up, but we'll never know, right? We would never know where he stands in the opportunities of maybe getting in next year or 5 years from now, or if his time has passed. We will never know that because again, there's no accountability. We don't really know. And maybe there's a bias against him because he was at one point a WHA guy. And I know you said he brought the two leagues together, but maybe he's looked at as, say, Donald Trump for USFL and NFL.
Well, I think if there is any of that, it might be more with the way that the things went down with Pittsburgh Penguins, which had financial problems in the 90s. There was a lot of controversy around that. There were two sides to every story, of course. But yeah, there could be all kinds of things like where people will say, men or women who are on the committee might say, well, not in my time is that I'm not talking about Howard, I'm just talking about in general. And to your point.
On an unrelated note, but related, last time we brought up Herb Carnegie, and Steve was friends with him, and now we talk about this, and he's friends with Howard Baldwin. Are to come up with a topic that doesn't have a friend of Steve involved in the discussion point?
Well, how about guys? Maybe it's me. Maybe it's the fact that they're friends with me that they're not in the Hall of Fame.
That could be. You speak of builders. Let me throw another builder out there that I've been stunned always that this guy is not in there. How, whether you loved him or hated him, how is Don Cherry not in the Hockey Hall of Fame?
Oh,
greatest off-ice ambassador of the game ever. I mean, who was more famous than Don Cherry in his heyday, especially in America? I mean, he introduced the game to many Americans and, enhanced the viewing experience for a lot of Canadians, similar to what a Howie Meeker would have done during his heyday. Don did it very differently, of course, very controversially at times, and that might be the knock against him. But I can't really think of another individual who off the ice had such an enormous impact. Don Cherry, in my books, is a Hall of Famer.
Rick, I think I do have that guy, and obviously this guy played, and I think was a better player. Obviously, I mean, it's not even a contest. Was a great NHL player, and was also a great figure off the ice, and that's Jeremy Roenick. I mean, we look at guys that are trying to bring character to this game where, we have so many NHLers that are just so vanilla. There's a guy that spoke his mind, that has continued as a broadcaster, and I know there's been some issues for some other stuff.
Just a little.
with NBC. But, I mean, that guy will still have a job somewhere talking about hockey, spreading the good word of hockey, not just to Canadians, but to American people in big markets.
Yeah, he's down the road to me. I want to go back to the original point. Was it yours, Rick, or yours, Bubba, that about Canadian bias as well? I mean, you might look at that with Roenick, but I think you got to look at some of the great Russian/Soviet players of the early era. I'm thinking particularly of Tikhonov as a builder, a coach, and a guy named I forget his first name, Vladimir Bobrov, who was the coach of the Soviet Union during the Summit Series. Right, he was really putting into play the principles that Tarasov invented for Soviet hockey. He was the godfather of Soviet hockey. He was the coach of that team, but he was also the first great Russian player. he played. He was basically the best forward. He was the part of the first great Russian quote unquote line. Won the '56 Olympics. Was the great. When Russia came out of nowhere in 1954 at the Worlds, he was the key player on that team, and he also played in the Olympics as a soccer player. And this guy was incredible. So there's another name that should be in there, and nobody knows about him.
Well, let me throw another name. You mentioned Tretchek, or you mentioned Tikhonov, which brings Tretchek. Tretchek is in the Hall of Fame, Vladislav Tretchek. And I think it's an absolutely fair argument to say that he had a great international career, there's no question. But had it not been for the 72 Summit Series, he would not be in the Hall of Fame because we would not have known really about him like we did. Does that throw open the door to a guy like Paul Henderson, who and I know and I wrote about this, and I've always had my doubts about Paul Henderson as a Hall of Famer because his resume really was a week in Moscow. That's the best part of his resume. And I thought, well, that's not long enough. And then I thought, well, wait a second. Lord Stanley of Preston is in the Hall of Fame, and all he did was buy a silver bowl for $50 and donate it. So,
well, I don't buy that. I don't buy Henderson.
If you do something so spectacular, maybe that buys you the lack of a resume.
I don't see that. Tretchek's different because most of his time
I agree.
had to be played at the
fact that
series
introduced him to everybody, and if you take that series away, I don't know that Tretchek gets in.
Well, it introduced you to the other things that he had done and continued to do. So that's not the case with Paul.
No, he had a good career the rest of his career.
Good career, exactly. And I love the guy, but I just don't necessarily.
That's a tougher one. That's a tougher one.
Yeah, take a look at some of the guys who are in like Carbonneau and that, and you go,
Two other guys that are overlooked as well. I mean, goalies are always overlooked. And you look at Curtis Joseph and Chris Osgood. Both players have won over 400 games. Not many goalies have played more games or won more games than Cujo. I mean, you can count it on one, using two hands for the other statistic. But guys that have had international success, have had great success in the National Hockey League, there's not a lot of love for goalies. I mean, unless you're the Dominic Hasek's and Patrick Waugh's and Martin Brodeurs of this generation, it's really hard to get in.
I find it real tough to vote for Curtis Joseph, and I know there's a lot of Maple Leaf love for the guy. But at the very minimum, you have to win a Vezina Trophy, I think, to be considered amongst one of the greatest of all time. A good, consistent career for Cujo in a couple of Canadian markets in Edmonton and Toronto, obviously. Had a so-so kind of a disappointing stay in Detroit. Had some good years in St. Louis. Always very consistent, I think, at the borderline. But I think you need that Vezina, or at least a Stanley Cup, to be a Hall of Fame goaltender. I'm
shocked, Bubba, that you jumped in out of those two that Rick mentioned. I'm shocked you jumped in to say no Cujo, because Chris Osgood, to me, is the product of being behind an unbelievable Detroit Red Wings team that if you put Chris Osgood on a poor team, we're never mentioning Chris Osgood as a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
He's like the quarterback who is on a great Super Bowl team, and the quarterback, you won, but it wasn't because of him. He was just okay. He was good enough to get
you. Dilfer.
There you go. Perfect example.
Yeah, the non-Vezina for Cujo. I mean, when you're playing in the same era of Dominic Hasek and Martin Brodeur and Patrick Waugh, I mean, three of the greatest goalies ever, it's hard to win an award. Yeah, he could have won it one year if he had a spectacular year. He had a lot of spectacular years, but those other guys were just a little bit better.
He was one of those guys that shots per goal, because the kind of teams that he played on most of the time were a big factor there. And of course, there's always that thing. We got this peculiar thing in hockey where we get behind these things. Oh, he's not one of those guys who could necessarily win. Well, we don't know because he didn't really always play on a team that was challenging. And also that he needed more shots to actually be good. And there's some goalies like that, but a lot of those are kind of trite phrases, trite analyses. I'm not sure I'd vote for Cujo, but I think he's also got to be discussed. Part of the deal is we're not going to see many Hall of Fame goalies coming out, given the way careers are so short. And
the bar is too high.
And the bar is too high.
We got to go. We could do this all day long. Just before I ask you to tell us who you think has been stunned, let me say one other thing, just very quickly, because we were talking about Don Cherry. The way the Hall of Fame committee screwed over Pat Burns, knowing he was going to go in the Hall of Fame and wouldn't vote him in while he was alive, waited till he was dead, and then elected him, which was absolutely the most mean-spirited, low, unfortunate thing they could ever do. Don Cherry will go into the Hall of Fame, but you get the sense they are just waiting for him to die so he doesn't get the joy or the glory or whatever else, because they don't want him to gloat about it. I truly believe that there is that sense that he will be in someday.
Yeah, I don't think it's intentional, but it is a shame.
It sure looked that way with Pat Burns. There was no other reason. Everyone knew he was going in, and you could have voted him in when he was alive, and to not do it, to me, was an absolute, I don't know, it shredded the humanity of the people on that committee in my mind. Anyway, who should be in the Hall of Fame? Who have we forgotten? Who has been snubbed? Our Twitter handles are on the screen. They'll be coming up after as well. We would love to hear from you. Tell your friends about this. Subscribe down below. Hit the notification button so you find out when all the home games videos are coming out. We'll talk to you soon.